Honor to be able to present this program to you this afternoon. And without much ado, we're going to start with an introductory video. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bergen County Executive Jim Tedesco. Thank you all for joining us tonight for our 5th annual Domestic Violence Awareness Symposium, hosted by the Borough of New Milford, the Public School District, and the Police Department. I'd like to thank our Bergen County Department of Human Services, Division of Alternatives to Domestic Violence, for the critical care they provide to our residents. ADV serves as a lifeline to those vulnerable communities and strives to eliminate domestic violence, dating abuse, and other forms of intimate partner violence through comprehensive approaches that address the causes and effects of abuse in diverse communities. I'd also like to thank the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office, the Sheriff, and our partners, the Center for Hope and Safety, who have been supporting women and children here in Bergen County for 4 decades. I am here today to lend my support to Bergen County's growing coalition of individuals, groups, and organizations that are taking a stand against abuse and promoting survivor-centered community responses to domestic violence. Domestic violence presents itself in many forms. Physical, emotional, sexual, financial, and psychological abuse can be used to maintain power or control over a partner. Abuse is a crime, and it is a despicable act. As we recognize Domestic Violence Awareness Month, it is important to understand that domestic violence is an issue that affects all demographics. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced some form of domestic violence in their lifetimes. Women between the ages of 18 and 24 are the most common victims of domestic abuse. And the numbers are even more staggering within the LGBTQ community. Together, we are working to support those harmed by domestic violence and help them live independent lives as we practice what it means to be a unified community against violence. As your county executive, I am grateful and honored to stand with you today and every day as we work to reduce the incidence of domestic violence in our communities and provide resources needed to support victims. Now, without further ado, I am pleased to share a video by our county's domestic abuse agency, Alternatives to Domestic Violence, on the warning signs of dating abuse. Thank you.
Welcome to Teen Dating Abuse 101. What defines a healthy relationship? All relationships are unique. Healthy ones are based on trust and respect. But they never leave us feeling afraid or unsafe. Healthy love shouldn't make us feel trapped, like we're walking on eggshells, lonely, taken for granted, like we have to keep secrets, pushing our limits, overwhelmed, or hopeless. Teen dating violence describes a relationship pattern that includes physical, verbal, emotional, or sexual abuse as a means of gaining and maintaining control of another person. Abuse is not accidental, is not limited to physical abuse, and rarely gets better on its own. Abuse does get worse over time and does make it harder for you to end the relationship. It can look like pushing, shoving, hitting, stalking and tracking you, threatening to hurt you or themselves, pressuring you for sex, stealing your money, putting you down or harsh criticisms, demanding your passwords, or any behavior that creates fear. We know that 1 in 3 teens will experience abuse in their lifetime, and only 1 in 3 teens will tell someone about it. Left unchecked, abuse gets in the way of our happiness and self-esteem, academics and work performance, athletics, friendships, interests and activities, and our health and wellness. Not all cases of teen dating violence follow the same pattern, but there are key warning flags to look out for. Look out for love bombing, isolation, setting rules, disrespecting boundaries, jealousy and possessiveness, punishment and rewards, and any person making excuses for hurting you. We are all entitled to certain rights in our relationships, like to be treated with respect, to ask for what we want, to say no, to be who we are, to feel safe, to make choices, to change our minds, to make mistakes, and to love ourselves and what's important to us. So question it when you see it. Confront it. Believe friends. Get others involved. And remember, we're here for you.
Michael Petrino.
Thank you. New Milford is extremely proud to be holding our 5th annual Domestic Violence Symposium. And I think it was a terrific idea to kind of take the topic and gear it more towards our younger audience. I think it's very important. I'm going to read the proclamation. Office of the Mayor Proclamation. Whereas domestic violence is widespread and affects more than 12 million Americans each year. And whereas according to statistics, 24 people per minute in America are victims of rape, stalking, or physical violence by an intimate partner. And whereas this means about 3 in 10 women and 1 in 10 men are victims or survivors of domestic violence. And whereas domestic violence is a serious crime that affects people of all ages, races, genders, and socioeconomic status. And whereas children that grow up in violent homes are believed to be abused and neglected at a rate higher than the national average. And whereas domestic violence costs the nation billions of dollars annually in medical expenses, police and court costs, shelters, foster care, sick leave, absenteeism, and the overall productivity. And whereas only awareness of a coordinated community effort will shine a light and put a stop to this criminal behavior. And whereas the Borough of New Milford has developed partnerships with the county, state, private organizations to spread awareness and education, and is committed to the safety and security of all of its residents, and to prosecuting perpetrators of domestic violence. And whereas Domestic Violence Awareness Month provides an excellent opportunity for residents to learn more about preventing domestic violence and to show support for the numerous organizations and individuals who provide critical advocacy, services, and assistance to victims and survivors. Now, therefore, I, Mayor Michael Petrino, do hereby proclaim October 2023 as Domestic Violence Awareness Month in New Milford, and urge all residents to know the signs, to report suspected abuse, and to reject and denounce behavior that minimizes or makes fun of domestic violence in real life, in the movies, internet, gaming, or any other circumstances. At this time, it is my privilege to introduce the Superintendent of the New Milford Public School District, Danielle Shanley.
Thank you, Mayor. I should have blown this up a little bit bigger. I'd like to thank you all for giving us your time today for what we think is a really, really important topic for each of you. Healthy relationships consist of trust, honesty, respect, equality, and compromise. And unfortunately, teen dating violence, the type of intimate partner violence that occurs between 2 young people who are or who once were in an intimate relationship, is a serious problem in the United States. And believe it or not, it's a problem here too. Teen dating violence can be any one or combination of the following, and you will hear these stories today. It can be physical violence, emotional violence, sexual violence. But teen dating violence can be prevented, especially when there's a focus on reducing risk factors and educating you on the protective factors, and when you're empowered through family, friends, and others to establish healthy relationships. Your teachers, your coaches, your mentors, your youth group leaders are all supposed to be there for you should you need them. It's important to create spaces such as school communities, where behavioral norms are not to tolerate abuse in dating relationships, any kind of abuse. The message must be clear that treating people in abusive ways will not be accepted, and the policies must enforce this message to keep students safe. And that is why we are here today, to expand your understanding and to make sure you know that this is a safe place for you and a place for you to get help should you need it. I would like to thank all of our panelists who are going to be speaking before you today, each of which is an expert in their field and or their personal experience. I would like to thank Girl Scout Troop 5569, led by Stephanie Coffinger and Tracy Petrino, who created the signs around the auditorium for you. Maybe a little hard to see in the dark, but after today's assembly, we will post them around the school. It's nice to know that we have young people who are talking about this and who are brave enough to get out there and display this kind of message. I'd like to thank the tech department here, Matt, Dan, Mike, Ron, everybody who helped pull this important assembly for you together. Kelly from Guidance, Doreen, Officer Jill, Mr. Manupelli, and Mr. Peroni, Geraldine, Andrea, Lauren. And I'd also like to thank our distinguished Board of Education members who are here today, Mr. Tony Albro and Stephanie Coffinger, all of our town council members who are here today. Most importantly, the Board of Education for its support. It's brave for some people to stand up and say, we need to educate students on this topic, even if some people don't want their children educated on this topic, for what reason I can't imagine. But it's brave to be able to say, our students need this, and I thank the board for endorsing that. I'd like to thank Matt Seymour, an attorney, an advocate for people and an advocate for education and the prevention of violence, and a town council member. And so before we move on, I would like to welcome a very special person here today and thank all of our dignitaries and panelists who are here today. But I'd like to introduce you to our county sheriff, Anthony Curitan. Did I say that right? Okay, good. Anthony Curitan, sheriff. Thank you. You could do it. I'm a little wide body. You could do it.
Thank you, Superintendent. Did a great job with that, Curitan. Well, excuse me. It's an honor to stand before you, not only a law enforcement practitioner, but also the opportunity to discuss or say how you have the support of nearly 3,000 officers in the County of Bergen. County of Bergen Chief Executive Officer or responsible for the law enforcement community is Prosecutor Mark Marcella. And I know him over many years. I've known several individuals who worked in his office, Miss Jessica Gomper over here, who put domestic violence first and really first out there because they understand the importance of having these discussions. The training that goes along with it, the working relationship with ADV, it's there. So when we really get together and talk about domestic violence, there are resources there. It's just it's up to the individual to take advantage of those resources. So I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to stand before you. Just know law enforcement is here. Chief Clancy and his staff, I know they're very active and staying in the forefront. The Board of Ed, Council, thank you for really taking that initiative and highlighting this. This is no secret. I'm glad they're highlighting this and putting forth and foremost so we can be in the positive in addressing it. We don't want to be reactive. We want to address it positively. Only reactive we want to do is making sure we heal those who experience some type of domestic violence. With that, I'd like to call Councilman Matt Seymour, my good friend. And again, it's early, but commend him. Give him a hand clap for all the great work he does.
Thank you, Sheriff. I also want to thank the New Milford Police Department, and in particular, our chief, Brian Clancy, for their unfaltering support since we started this program several years ago. And as well as, of course, the mayor and the council, the borough, and the school district for their support. The reason that we're here today is to hear stories of survival, and then hear from our esteemed panelists to address the issues which impact our youth, and in particular, of course, teen dating violence. Dating violence is unfortunately an issue and a problem that transcends all of our differences. It affects both genders, it affects all races, all religions, all ethnicities. At this time, I would like to invite this year's guest speaker, Danielle, to share her courageous story of survival.
Good afternoon, everybody. Before I get started, I want to let you know that staff is walking around, so at any point that you feel like you need to exit the room, please just flag one of them down. 10 years ago, I was sitting exactly where you are right now. I was excited to be missing class, especially if it was a class that I didn't like. 10 years ago, I wish I had the assemblies about essential topics outside of school, especially one like this. I always thought about domestic violence was primarily physical. But over time and therapy, I allowed myself to heal from what other domestic violence is, such as the physical, the mental, emotional, verbal, and sexual. Today, I will discuss two relationships during my junior year of high school. Nick and Joe are made-up names, but the stories remain the same. Nick started as one of my friends, then moved to my best friend, and eventually, he became my boyfriend at one point. Going into this relationship, I knew Nick would cheat on his girlfriends because, as his friend, I saw everything. And during our relationship, I thought that I was special because it was me, and he wouldn't cheat on me. I felt like I knew him up to the point where I didn't. Nick had issues with his own mental health and was in and out of rehab for drugs. He has been arrested during our relationship and our friendship several times for it. Everyone knows the saying, boys will be boys, right? Well, that's what I thought every time he would punch me for fun, claiming it was a joke. I thought every time I had my hair up mistakenly by him as he'd grab my hair and force me to crawl on the floor like a dog. I have a photo of him from a night, and I remember that night he made me crawl around the driveway while it was in the middle of winter, and our friends were there. Nick always got so comfortable punching me because it was a joke. Eventually, the joke wasn't a joke, and he kept doing it for fun. To this day, he claims that he had never hit or abused me. Yet one night, he got so angry at me during a party, I flinched when he got close to me. I was terrified that he was actually going to hit me now in public because he was so comfortable doing it all the time. During our relationship, Nick would throw my mental health issues in my face. He would always tell me how he could do better than me, how no one likes me, that my friends talk about me behind my back, and that I'm too prude for him. When he would go out and cheat on me, he would tell me that it was my fault for not wanting to sleep with him. It was my fault that he had to go elsewhere to get what he wanted. Mind you, he once left me at his house for 3 hours when I was supposed to sleep over so he can get laid by someone else and smoke with them. When I left that night because I was over it, he yelled at me and told me it was his fault, that it was my fault. No matter what I did, it was always my fault. If he was in a bad mood, it was my fault. He cheated, my fault. He also got mad at me and told me it was my fault when he forgot his wallet because everything was my fault. So at this point, I believed everything was my fault and we would be fighting, and somehow he would make me think the reason why we're fighting is because of me. He would put all of our issues on Twitter to make fun of me, to get others to make fun of me, and trash me online. He had a photo of me that I sent like an idiot, and I thought he wouldn't share it with anyone. He showed all of our guy friends, and during one fight, he told me that he would send it and post it online because he could. But I told him angrily that he should because I looked great and I don't care. One night, I was at his house with his friends. Our friends were downstairs while him and I were in his bedroom. He kept telling me how we should sleep together so he doesn't have to look elsewhere, and then he could stop cheating on me. It got up to the point where the condom was on, and I was so uncomfortable, and I wanted to throw up. I didn't want to be there with him. I wanted to go home. He tried to put it in, and it was just the tip, and I said I had to go to the bathroom. I got up, wrapped myself in a blanket, and went to the bathroom. My best friend banged on the door and told me, "Danielle, just do it." Nick got pissed at me for getting up and leaving him like that, wasting a condom and giving him blue balls because I killed the mood by needing to go to the bathroom, even though all I wanted to do was get out of that situation. As I heard him leave the room, I returned and put my clothes on, went downstairs, and said goodbye to all my friends. I didn't want to sleep with Nick. I wasn't ready to sleep with anyone, and being out a virgin at 17 and 18, my friends thought I was weird. They kept telling me I should get over with it, but I wanted to wait, and I didn't want it to be Nick. A few years later, Nick came to my friend's birthday while we were all finally over 21. He told me that he told everyone he took my virginity, and I told him he didn't, and so did. He got embarrassed for once, and it felt great. On the other hand, the friend who invited him did know everything that happened with us. She knew that he abused me mentally, physically, and emotionally, but yet still put me in a room with him because she didn't care. At that moment, I knew that girl was no longer my friend, because as a friend, you don't put your friends in those situations. Now, my other ex-boyfriend named Joe was someone I met while I was dating Nick, but towards the end. Joe and his girlfriend broke up because his ex-girlfriend Jill cheated on him with Nick shortly after Nick and I broke up. The reason that was important is because it will come up again later. The beginning of mine and Joe's relationship was much better than Nick and I. Joe treated me amazingly. I was 18 and 19 at this time, and Joe was 21. I started to like Joe, but everything in our relationship went slowly, and he never pressured me to do anything I didn't want to until it became something with drugs. Joe introduced me to Xanax and Molly. First with Xanax, he would put it on my chest and tell me to take it with everyone else in the room. In the beginning, I loved how much Xanax calmed me down when I was anxious, when I wasn't okay. And he pressured me, and he never pressured, sorry. But it wasn't until I smoked and drank on top of Xanax that I really became to love it, because I would black out during these times. Joe would pick me up from school, including my friends, and allowed me to drive his car whenever I wanted. He would buy me a platter of sushi, smoke my friends and I up, and get me food whenever and wherever I wanted. Joe cared when I was upset and allowed me to vent to him. He was kind, seemed normal, and sweet until he wasn't. Joe would use what I told him and what I vented, and somehow it would be used against me. I didn't need him as much, and I didn't want to hang out with him all the time anymore. When I wasn't with him, he would want me to send pictures of where and who I was with. One time I was at Taco Bell with my girlfriend of mine, and he didn't believe that I was eating in the parking lot with Kelly. He kept calling me until I finally sent a photo of where I was, proving that I wasn't lying to him. There were also times when I would watch him drive past my house with his lights off so he wouldn't think that I knew he was stalking me. 6 months into our relationship, I no longer wanted to be with someone who didn't trust me, as I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was finally healing from the drama Nick has caused in my life, and I was fed up with someone treating me less than I deserved. It took a lot out of me to look at other relationships around me, my aunt, my uncle, my friends, who were all in healthy relationships, and I always questioned, why isn't this mine? 6 months into our relationship, I ended it. It was a weekday, and I was here at the high school during my 10:30 morning lunch period. I received a text from Joe, and Joe informed me that he swallowed a bottle of pills, and his life was in my hands, and he was going to see Adam. Adam died 2 years prior, on November 10, 2010. He was the love of my life and my best friend. He used this against me for breaking up with him because he knew mentioning Adam's name would hurt me. As someone who attempted suicide, I knew what to do. I found Officer Wild, who was the school's officer at the time, and showed him the text messages that I received from Joe and how to get to Joe's house. Officer Wild contacted Joe's local PD, and they rushed to Joe's house, only to find him perfectly fine in his living room playing his guitar. Later on, Joe texted me saying he was released from the hospital, and he was unaware that I knew that he never swallowed a bottle of pills. He wanted me to feel sorry for him and to talk to him. I knew if he swallowed a bottle of pills that he would be held on a 72-hour time, and I'm grateful to know that because when I attempted, Ms. Zacher got me the help that I needed. For more than a month, Joe wouldn't leave me alone. He would harass me and stalk me on all forms of social media, continue to drive past my house, and always end up where I was because my friends would tell him what our plans were for that night. To this day, I do wish things had gone differently with Joe. I still compare him to most guys in the beginning stages of our relationship because that was our best time. Thankfully, because Nick and Joe, I learned a lot of red flags of what not to notice in a horrible relationship. Domestic violence isn't just physical. It's also mental and emotional, and it took me a long time to understand that I was in those relationships. I worked with a therapist to process many things, but my therapist needed to explain to me that even though those relationships felt normal to me, they weren't. I remember when I wanted to walk away from my relationships that didn't reflect my aunt and my uncle's relationship, that they didn't scream love like they should. The guys I dated in one of my darkest moments used what they could about me, pin it against me, and make it all my fault because they were the boys. Now, this is just my story, and it doesn't need to be yours. It is healthy to be obsessed with your partner, but in elements. Just because you don't like the answer to your significant other and you don't answer them the proper time that they want you to, it doesn't mean you're a jerk. It doesn't mean that when you're upset about something that your feelings aren't valid. You are not crazy. You're not emotional. You're just feeling your feelings, and you're entitled to those. You are entitled to feel how you do because something that made you feel that way. If your partner doesn't acknowledge how you feel, try to make it your fault, gaslight you, that's not the person you shouldn't be dating. And to all the guys in this room, this can happen to you. It has happened to a bunch of my guy friends. While their girlfriends were being vindictive, manipulative, and narcissistic as well. Remember to put yourself first. Listen to the feeling if something feels off and your gut tells you otherwise. Please talk to your friends, to your parents, to your teachers, to your guidance counselors. They're all here to help you and listen. Even for this assembly, I needed Ms. Zacher to remind me all the good I've done in my life and not to re-victimize myself. Don't be afraid to confide in them. I'm 29, and I still go to my mother for advice, and I wish I had spoken to her more about it when I was 17. Remember, this is my story, and it doesn't have to be yours. Thank you.
That was a tremendous story. Let's give her a round of applause. I'd just like to emphasize how difficult it is for somebody not only to seek help, but to have the courage to share their story, in particular in such a public setting. But each time a survivor comes forward and shares his or her story, it inspires others to come forward. Just to give a brief introduction of those who will be joining us momentarily. We're going to be joined this afternoon by the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office, the Bergen County Sheriff's Department, Bergen County Alternatives to Domestic Violence, which is the county domestic violence agency, Wafa House, a partnership for change, the YWCA Northern New Jersey Healing Space Organization, the Violence Prevention Center of Bergen Community College, the New Milford Police Department, the Center for Hope and Safety, and a retired Superior Court judge who for years sat and heard cases of domestic violence, Judge Ronnie Jo Siegel. So I'd like to welcome our panel and invite them up to the stage.
Sheriff, this is you. Allison, this is you. Catherine, that's you.
I would also like to invite those of you who have questions, either in relation to the story that you just heard that was shared by Danielle, or completely unrelated as it pertains to teen dating violence. There's a QR code in all of your programs. Feel free to scan the QR code and anonymously submit your question. And when you do so, feel free, please, I encourage and invite you to direct your question to a particular panelist if you would like. To begin our panel discussion, I'm going to start with the Chief of the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office, Domestic Violence Unit, Senior Assistant Prosecutor Jessica Gomberts, and ask Ms. Gomberts to please just very briefly define what is teen dating violence.
Hi, everyone. As we just heard from Danielle, teen dating violence is when there is a dating relationship between two people and there is any type of abuse, be it mental or emotional, physical, sexual, financial. And I always like to say, especially when I speak to high schools or middle schools or really kids of any age, that there isn't one definition of what is dating. When we talk about it with adults, we talk about intimate partner violence. But when we talk about kids and we talk about dating, there isn't really one definition of what is dating. Because as I know, having a 13-year-old daughter, what your parents would consider dating, what used to be dating back in the olden days when we were young, is not what is dating now with kids. I mean, I don't think that teenagers even use the word dating anymore. I know that my daughter and her friends certainly don't, right? When you're 13 or 14 or 15, nobody's dating anymore. There are people that you're talking to, which means something completely different than somebody that you're having a conversation with. There are different names for things. There are different ways that relationships unfold. You could be involved in a relationship with somebody that you've never actually met. You can be what we would consider dating someone that you've never been in the same room with. It's just somebody that you're having a relationship with through snaps or through other type of social media or through other communication methods. So dating violence is really anybody that you're involved within a romantic relationship where there is some type of abuse or manipulation or control going on.
Thank you. Thank you, Prosecutor. This question is for Laura Melendez at Bergen County ADV, Alternatives to Domestic Violence. Laura, could you please speak very briefly to describing for our students, when does an unhealthy relationship cross into abusive territory, and how does context play a role?
Thank you, Leo. Thank you. Sure. So context absolutely matters, right? Because there is no such thing as a perfect relationship. There isn't. And it is normal to have any relationship cross into the spectrum of what's healthy and unhealthy, right? At some point in the relationship, I think the infatuation runs out, the love drugs wear off, initially where we might have thought that that person was perfect in our eyes, and we would have accommodated, we would have flexed, we would have tried really hard to make that person happy. Eventually that comes to an end, and that's perfectly normal. And that's when we get into a natural power struggle, where we have our needs and the other person has their needs, right? And we come up with different ways of trying to negotiate our shared needs in that relationship. Doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter if you're dating, if you're married, that's going to happen. Now, when it becomes unhealthy, that's when one person is trying to assert their needs above the other person, right? And that's when we lead into conflict, like fights and arguments and disagreements. And that is also part of a healthy relationship. When it becomes abusive is when that argument now is not about negotiation. You're not able to ask for what you need because the other person is saying, my needs are always going to be more important than you. And not only is one person's needs being treated as more important, but that person is now utilizing power. So whatever they have access to in that relationship, is it information? Is it access to fear? Can they make you afraid of them? Can they threaten you? Can they guilt trip you? Can they exploit something in that relationship where now you cannot negotiate in that relationship? Those are relationships that we can't walk back, that we can't go to counseling for, that we can't wait until it gets better, because now one person is afraid of the other person. All right? So I would say that context is very important, because in any single conflict, we can do things that hurt the other person's feelings. We can make mistakes. We can say and do things that we then want to take back, but that's situational. Abuse is something that is going to get worse over time, and the longer that we've been in it, it becomes harder for that person who's been on the receiving end of that abuse to get out. And that's the key thing there. It's going to get worse, and that person who's on the receiving end is now going to need help getting out.
And I'd like to direct this question to Allison Bressler from A Partnership for Change. Allison, could you please speak to what are the first signs or warning flags of an abusive relationship that our students should watch out for?
Am I on? I'm blinded by the light. What are the first warning signs? Well, here's the thing. We tend to get a little confused over those warning signs, right? So if you think about when you first start hanging out with someone and they start to show signs of jealousy, oftentimes, what are we thinking? That person likes me so much, they said they'll kill me if I hang out with someone else. This person is so into me, they don't even want me talking to my friends anymore. They want to spend every second with me. Oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing I've ever had. And so we get it a little mixed up. We think jealousy and possessiveness are yummy. And they're actually your first two red flags that it's going in a really bad direction. So we don't want anyone to get confused when someone that we're into is monopolizing our time and sort of blanketing it with, but I love you so much. I'm so into you. I just want it to be us all the time. Why do you got to hang out with your friends? Or things like, why don't you turn your locations on? I mean, I know you a minute and a half, but I need to know where you are every second so I can make sure you're safe all the time. Or give me your passwords. Let me see your phone. Let me take a look at these things because I love you. And so we get super confused because we confuse it with, this person must really be into me and must really love me. But the reality is they're slowly taking those baby steps to control you and take away your power. Now, here's the really cool and exciting thing. My agency, A Partnership for Change, is coming into New Milford High School, and we're going to be running our Power Back Teen Dating Abuse program beginning in 2 weeks. So we're going to be here to start to talk to the juniors first and then the rest of the school, and we are going to teach all of you what this issue really, really is from a really gritty standpoint so you get it. And so that you can be advocates and change the direction for yourself and for other people. But always starts with knowing those beginning warning signs. Jealousy, possessiveness, first two red flags.
Thank you, Allison. Allison just spoke about some of the red flags and warning signs to look out for in an abusive relationship. This question is for Catherine Miller, who is a senior staff attorney at the Center for Hope and Safety. Kate, could you please follow that up with what would you say are the highest risk behaviors that can lead to the highest risk of being injured?
Of being injured? Well, there's been a lot of things done about being of lethalities, but what I would look out for is any sort of grabbing of necks, because obviously that can be a huge thing. So if somebody's like, maybe first they're just like grabbing you, and then they start like strangling you or something, that's a huge thing that's very high correlated with various fatalities and such. As far as risks of being injured, I'm just gonna bring it back to our survivor's story where she said how he started by like playfully punching her and stuff that then could lead to more serious thing where she could be injured, and maybe the playing, where's the line between playing and then it starts actually going, coupled with the jealousy, into actually being injured.
Thank you for that, Kate. And for a moment, I'm going to turn to New Milford Police Officer Jillian Agnello, who of course is also your student resource officer here at New Milford High School. Officer, could you please speak to your department's response if somebody comes to you and needs help?
Hello? Okay, just want to make sure that it was actually on. Yeah, you guys know me as Officer Jill in the school, and I'm really here as a resource for you guys, and hopefully you guys already know that. But I am a member of the New Milford Police Department, and I'm a full-time police officer. And so out on the road on patrol, you know, when patrol responds to a situation such as domestic violence, you know, that's a call we take very seriously. And when we show up, you know, our first priority is safety. We want to make sure that everybody in that situation is safe, number one. And number two, you know, if anybody needs medical attention, that's like, you know, the first thing that we do is we're going to get you medical attention. But here at the school, me being the school resource officer, you know, hopefully you guys know where my office is and that I'm a resource to you. So if you guys are experiencing something in your relationship or you're experiencing something at home, it doesn't have to be something that's happening in the school. You know, you can come to me with anything and then we can go forward from there. Me being a police officer, I have a lot of resources that I can get you in contact with. All of these people up here, I can call them, you know, and they would come help. So, but in terms of a patrol response out on the road, when we're working as police officers, like I said, our number one priority is safety, making sure that everybody's safe, and then realizing what's going on in that situation, talking to the victim, talking to the abuser. If it rises to a level where we need to effect an arrest on somebody who has physically assaulted or sexually assaulted somebody, you know, we would proceed to do that and go forward. But our number one priority is making sure that that victim is safe and making sure that that victim gets the resources that they need.
Thank you, Officer. And while we're on law enforcement, I'd like to ask Sheriff Cureton. Sheriff, could you please speak to the role of law enforcement in a situation where a victim is being threatened with damage to his or her reputation or leaking damaging information? How can law enforcement address those situations?
Well, typically in law enforcement, we respond to the information that's provided to us. So with that, it's critical that you get the information to us so we can address it appropriately. I've been doing this stuff for about 35 years, and I remember in '89, officers were really not required, to say the least, to act upon domestic violence. They were there to resolve the situation. But during that period in time, things started to happen that eventually resulted in mandatory arrest situations. So at that time, it was a lack of communication or law enforcement not going the extra step to get that information from a victim. And it was a continued perpetuation of domestic violence. But now, you know, there's an information channel. So it's up to you to speak openly and tell someone around you or the law enforcement community of your situation and not feel ashamed, but just knowing there's someone there to help you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Now, just following this further down the path of law enforcement, Judge Siegel, if someone does push forward with allegations of violence and abuse, what is the role of the courts? What is the role of the judiciary? And how can the courts help protect that victim?
Well, when you heard the prosecutor speak, she was talking about acts of domestic violence that are also crimes. There are some times where victims choose to pursue a request for a restraining order, a protective order, but don't choose to prosecute the case criminally. And that's where, our office comes in, meaning the judiciary, and we're here to let you know that you can seek, if there is an act of domestic violence, obtaining a restraining order to protect you from the defendant. So there's a different approach. It's not a criminal act, but rather you can seek to have a restraining order protect you and your safety from future acts of domestic violence.
Judge, thank you. This question is for Bergen Community College Violence Intervention Prevention Center. I'm going to ask you guys to talk about, on the college campus, what kind of services can you offer survivors? And in particular, how do you guys deal with the unique challenge of students sharing a campus space in terms of keeping the victim safe?
Hello? Okay. So what we offer is a safe space. We offer community resources. We're partnership with ADV as well as Healing Space to offer resources, and we meet the peer where we're at. We also provide peer support, which is basically we talk to the peer, we try to explain to them the resources that they have, because half the time they don't know that these resources exist. So we meet them where they're at. We try to offer as much emotional support as they can in that moment.
Thank you. And that was, for those of you who don't know him, that was Leonard Clark. He is doing a great job at Bergen Community College, keeping people safe. And I'm going to have the same question for Jonathan Cano, if you could please provide your insight.
Yes, Matthew. So at Bergen Community College, the Violence Intervention Prevention Center also educates the students with what dating violence, stalking is. And I think it's very important to talk about this because it's not something that we all talk all the time. So we offer workshops for students to know what these topics are and how to prevent of that to happen.
Thank you. And this question is for the YWCA, Northern New Jersey Healing Space, which is New Jersey's nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting victims and survivors of sexual assault. My question is this. First of all, is sexual assault domestic violence? And second, what is the role that is unique to helping victims and survivors in such extreme situations?
I'm sorry, repeat the second part of that?
What is the role of your agency in assisting victims and survivors in those situations?
So the first question, in terms of whether sexual violence is considered domestic violence, at times it isn't, and it is separate, and at times it is, and there is a lot of overlap when it comes to that. And it's very important to know that there is a lot of overlap, and that at times there's a lot of connections to these different types of scenarios and situations. And then the role of Healing Space specifically in dealing with SV or helping people with it is to provide advocacy, is to have our licensed clinicians be available for people so that they can get the counseling that they need and the help that they need to process and get through these emotions, very complex emotions, and what it means to go through sexual assault. We also have a hotline, and if anyone needs the number or anything, please feel free to talk to me. We have a hotline that anyone can call, and they'd be talking to a confidential sexual violence advocate, which is someone who goes through like a 40-hour training, and it really helps them out in terms of being there for people, supporting people, and giving them the resources that they need. Even if it isn't our resources, we're still able to help you get other resources within the community. And yeah, we have the community prevention and outreach portion to our agency as well. And we go out into the community, we do prevention work, we present to kids and other young adults like you guys, and we teach them about sexual violence, consent, healthy dating, healthy relationships, media literacy, because as we know, social media is very important, and there's a lot of sexual violence that also happens on social media as well, so much of it. So yeah, we have a lot of different roles and things that we do to help people, but the goal is always just to support, help, and love people and meet them where they're at. when dealing with sexual violence. And again, it overlaps with DV so many times. So also finding ways to support them in that way as well, or get them resources that they might need aside from the ones that we provide. So yeah.
Thank you for that. And this question is a question that is combined for both Assistant Prosecutor Gomberts and Kate Miller at the Center for Hope and Safety. Could you please explain very briefly, for somebody who is seeking a protective order from an offender, from an actor, what's the difference between a traditional restraining order and a Survivors Act or SASPA protective order? Who wants to take this question?
Thanks, Kate. So the short answer is that in order to get a traditional restraining order, the kind that Judge Siegel was talking about, you need to qualify. You need to fall into a certain category, meaning that you need to have been in a dating relationship currently or had been in a dating relationship with somebody. So under the law, in order to get a restraining order, what we all think about when we hear the words restraining order, there you need to have been boyfriend, girlfriend, or girlfriend, girlfriend, boyfriend, girlfriend. You need to have been in some type of romantic relationship with somebody. To get a SASPA, which stands for Sexual Assault Survivor Protection Act restraining order, it's an order that was created to fill in the gaps where the restraining order doesn't cover. And it's if you were a victim of some type of sexual violence from somebody who you don't qualify for a restraining order with, who you weren't in a dating relationship with, who isn't your former boyfriend or your girlfriend, but you've been the victim of sexual violence and you still want a protective order, but you wouldn't qualify for a restraining order. And also, I just looked out into the audience and saw all these baby dolls in little click and goes, and it just creeped me out really badly for a minute. And I assume you guys are in the middle of your baby doll project, but that is just a creepy visual from the stage, just so you all know.
Thank you, thank you.
I just wanted to add something. First of all, I want to second the creepy visual of the babies. It is distractingly creepy. Happy Halloween, guys. But also, both the restraining order and the SASPA, the abuser needs to be over 18. So I know that a lot of you guys are still in high school, so the abusers may not be over 18. If they're under 18, you can still go to the juvenile courts, and there are other options. But for the restraining order and the SASPAs, they need to be over 18. But the victim can be under 18.
Thank you. Judge Siegel.
There are some distinctions. So assuming that you're prepared to go forward, you want to know what's the difference in the kind of relief that you're seeking. In the state of New Jersey, different than so many other states, if you can get a protective order or you get a restraining order, it's permanent in nature. It does not go away with the passage of time. And that applies to a SASPA, that applies to a domestic violence restraining order. A monetary fine for the defendant, fingerprinting for a domestic violence restraining order, not for a SASPA protective order. In a restraining order, you go on a nationwide registry so that everybody knows that you have a restraining order against you. You have a prohibition from the use of any weapons. If there's a violation in either instance, more than twice, you could be incarcerated. So the protections to a victim, the punishment to an offender is grave in essentially all instances, but there are some modest differences.
Thank you, Judge. This question is for Mina Mohammed at Wafa House. Mina, could you please address what can someone do when the abuse is happening at home?
So if we say teen dating abuse, right, a lot of teens who become abusive in nature have experienced abuse in their home, which would look more like child abuse. So a lot of students have come and said, well, in our home, we hear yelling, we see hitting. So we saw our whole lives that this is normal, right? That this is how people express love, that they yell at each other, that they hit each other, that this is normal. When in reality, it's not normal and it's not acceptable. But because you were taught for so many years that this is normal, that you kind of then become an abuser. And if that does happen, please reach out for help. And if you know someone who is being abused at home, please reach out to the New Jersey Child Abuse Hotline.
Can I just jump in real fast? I think what's also really important to know, and I'll talk about this more in a couple weeks when I'm in front of the juniors, girls, and the boys will be speaking with somebody as well. One thing you must know is that if it is happening in your home, two things really important. One, you are not your parents' therapist. It's not your job to save them. That's really important that you know that. The second thing that's really important to know that is that there's help and there's support out there. You're allowed to talk about it with another adult. You're allowed to speak to it with somebody you trust. It does not have to stay a secret within your home. You are not in trouble by going out and getting the support that you need. And most importantly, it doesn't define you. I don't want you to think because this is what I know, this is what I saw, this is what I live in, that obviously this is what a relationship is. You can absolutely love and adore your parents or guardian and hate the behavior. And that's okay, because it doesn't have to be accepted in your own personal lives either.
Thank you. And I'd like for a moment to follow up on abuse in the household. This question is for Jonathan. I'm sorry. Yes, for you, Jonathan. So if you have a student at the college who is struggling because unfortunately they go home to an abusive household, how can you help them?
So in that case, we always outreach for the student if that happens.
So I'll just pick up where he left off. We always we always aid the student where they're at, like we always say. Now, what that means is that we will outreach to an organization such as ADV, such as the prosecutor's office, and get them the aid that they need right there in that spot. If they need a place to stay, we would reach out to Healing Space, or we would reach out to Center of Hope and Safety to get them the resources that they need. If they just need a place to talk, if they just need a place to vent, that's what we're here for. We offer peer support.
Thank you, and I have a question for Patrick Lavagna with Bergen County ADV. Patrick, what can a student do if they're being abused by a partner in school that they're dating, and they tell their parents about it, and the parents are having a hard time believing them?
Oh, I'm sorry, the question is, what can a student do if
they're not believed?
If they're not believed.
Right.
I kind of want to, as a expert in the profile of abusive behavior, I kind of want to defer to my colleague Laura on how a student who is being abused should respond when they're not being believed. Later on, I hope to explain how it's so effective for the abuser when the community doesn't believe a victim.
Unfortunately, if in the home, if a family doesn't have the language, right? If a family isn't, because just like individuals, groups, family groups cannot be ready to engage in that conversation for different reasons, right? Maybe parents don't believe that abuse is a thing, or that believe that abuse is physical, right? Or maybe the family is going through their own stuff, right? And by beginning to talk about it and affecting their children, it kind of forces them to talk about their own stuff, right? So there may be a lot of things going on as to why the readiness is not there, but to that point, that's why community building is a big piece of the healing process, because a lot of this is going on in isolation. As we heard from Danielle earlier, when someone's being abusive, and again, it doesn't matter if it's your dating partner, it could be a family member, it could be somebody in the community, one of the biggest things that they're trying to do is isolate you, They're trying to get at those other quality, valuable relationships that you have with other people. So your friends, don't want you talking to them anymore. Your parents, I want to make you feel like you can't trust them to handle this, right? The trusted folks at school, they don't care about you. They don't have the time for you, right? So a big piece of this is making someone feel isolated, like no one's going to help them, no one's going to want to give them the time. And the sad part is, if a piece of that is true, and if a piece of that feels true to that survivor, right? Nobody is listening to me. Nobody is looking out for me. The biggest piece of advice I would give is find your people. Find your people, because you all have your people, whether it's your best friend, if it's folks on the internet, social media, right? If it's that one teacher or that coach that sees you, that believes you, right? At ADV, we've just launched our youth empowerment programs where we do free counseling for anybody 14 and up. Find your people, right? Because if the help and support isn't coming from parents, or if it isn't coming from other trusted adults in your life, right? Find your people. And if you need help figuring out who they are or how to breach that conversation with them, we're just a phone call away.
Thank you, and we're going to start very momentarily moving to some of your questions, but I have a question for Officer Jill. Officer Jill, what's the difference between just play fighting in a relationship and actual abuse?
Hello? Okay, great. I seem to have a problem with microphones. Normally I just talk without them. So the difference in play fighting, so you all heard the survivor story, which she was really brave to come up here and tell you that she was being abused in her relationship as a teenager in this very school. And it started out as play fighting about how her boyfriend was just punching her playfully, right? Oh, and everyone says boys will be boys, you know, and everyone kind of laughs it off like that's okay, and it's not okay. And the difference between that is, you know, as a police officer, when I come into a situation of domestic violence, and in the state of New Jersey, if a victim has a bruise on her or him, a mark from the abuser, right away that abuser is in handcuffs and they're getting arrested. And that is a law in the state of New Jersey. It's called a mandatory arrest. So if you as a student are, you know, you're dating somebody who is abusing you in that way and they're playing it off like it's play fighting, that's not play fighting. That's serious. Because if they were over 18, they would be getting arrested, right? So I want you guys to know that that's not okay, and that you can come to me if something is happening in the school, that your partner is doing something to you that you're not comfortable with. Because like I said, the laws in the state of New Jersey are very clear with domestic violence in terms of, as a police officer, when I need to be arresting somebody. So I just want you guys to make sure that you understand that it is a serious conversation, that you please come to me. Just because you're not 18, you know, just because you're a juvenile doesn't mean that you don't have the same rights as somebody else, that, you know, your feelings, what you feel in your relationship doesn't matter, because it does, and it's very important. And that is my role here as your school resource officer. It's not just to keep you safe from something outside of the school coming in, but to keep you safe while you're in school from somebody else that might be abusing you here while you're a student.
Thank you, Officer. So our first audience question, and I thank all of you for giving us questions. We appreciate that. This question is for Kate. What if someone threatens you with a weapon but never actually uses it?
Well, the threat with a weapon, even if it's never actually used, it is still a crime, and you can absolutely report it to either the police or go to the judiciary.
Thank you. This question is for Allison. What are the most important elements for teenagers in our current times to be aware of when it comes to dating violence?
The most important elements?
Yes.
Can you give me more in-depth insight into that question? What do you mean by the most important elements?
I'm just reading the question. I would suppose it's asking, when it comes to dating violence among our youth, what would you say are the most important issues in our current times?
Well, I think that you should all know that it's 1 out of 3 teenage girls, it's 1 out of 7 teenage boys. As stated in the video earlier, LGBTQ plus numbers are going through the roof. Transgender are experiencing the highest forms of physical violence. I mean, this is just the reality of what's happening out there. I think it's important to know that oftentimes, I mean, we've spoken to so many teens and we hear the same thing over and over again, which is, I don't know if it's, if it's really abuse, if I'm not getting, the crap kicked out of me. And so we really have to understand what it means to give our power up. And that's a really huge thing. I think it's so important when we come in and we talk to the teens, is that they really understand that if they're not doing what they want, if they're not expressing themselves the way they want, if they're not on social media the way they want, have friendships the way they want, if they're just not living their life the way they want because they're scared of what their partner's gonna say and do, that's abuse. So if I'm actually not hanging out with my friends because I know I'm gonna get 200 messages from my partner giving me tons of crap, accusing me of cheating, giving me a hard time, fighting with me, it's just easier not to hang out with my friends, you're being abused in your relationship. And we miss that. I'm saying we as if I'm a teen, because I look young with these lights, right? Yeah, okay. And so these things get missed. And it's so important to understand what that is super early before you're emotionally invested. You know what, that's the biggest thing, before you're emotionally invested. And I talk about this because if you're walking down the street and a complete stranger walked up to you and smacked you across the face, said horrible things to you and knocked you to the ground and turned around and started to walk away, but stopped and said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, what was I thinking? Would you forgive them? Of course not. Why would you not forgive that stranger for beating you up and then apologizing? I do not know you. Who the hell you think you are putting your hands on me like that, right? We don't know them. And it's always been so confusing to me when you think, why, if we would never tolerate such behavior from a complete stranger, do we somehow accept the apology from someone who backs it up with I love you? And so these are the things we have to understand. We would never tolerate that from a stranger. Why is it okay with I love you? Know what those early warning signs are. I know I'm kind of going round robin. Know what those early warning signs are.
Matt, can I just follow up on that real quick?
Yes, please.
So we call that the, am I going to get in trouble for this red flag, right? So if you're in a relationship where before you do something you want to do, your first thought is, am I going to get in trouble with my boyfriend or my girlfriend if I go and do this thing? That is a huge red flag. You should not ever be in trouble with your boyfriend if you want to go out with your friends. You should never be in trouble with your girlfriend if you want to try out for the school play or go to football practice or whatever it is you do. If you're going to get a ration of shit from your boyfriend or girlfriend because of the choices that you make, then that is a huge red flag. And that's not love, that's excessive possessiveness and excessive jealousy. And that should be a really huge warning sign to you that you are not in a healthy relationship.
I'd just like to follow up with you, Jessica. Is there a statute of limitations for a student who's trapped either in a dating violence relationship or even a sexually violent relationship to seek protection?
To seek protection, no. I mean, there are statutes of limitation on whether or not a criminal prosecution can happen, but there is never a statute of limitations on whether or not you can seek protection from orders of protection, and there is never a statute of limitations on when you can seek protection from the police or when you can seek help from a teacher, a guidance counselor, or any other trusted adult.
Thank you. Patrick, could you please talk about safety planning and in addition, again, and I hate to keep going back to this, but how you guys address a problem when the teen doesn't feel they're believed when they go home?
Okay. So if I can, I'm going to when we're talking about safety planning, I think it's important to first like identify the problem, right? And I'm thinking and I've been dwelling up here on this and I thought I was making the beeping noise. I think it was a truck out there. Sorry. As I was listening to Danielle's story, something like really struck me, and it was the amount of times that she referenced being assaulted, being abused, being coerced amongst her peers. And you know, when we talk about why people are abusive, the crude answer, the blunt answer is because we as a community allow it. They can get away with it. And that doesn't change unless we're part of the problem and we are part of the solution. There's a study, I'm sorry, I'm going a little bit off of a tangent, but you guys control the mics. There's a recent study, a lot of times, like I bet you if I asked everybody here, like, why does somebody abuse their partner? They might say that they grew up in an abusive home. That statistically is not necessarily accurate. There's like some like correlations, but it's not statistically accurate. Actually, there's a study that says like peers and peers that support the abusive behavior is more like indicative of who will be abusive to their partner. So if you're at a party and you see somebody, you know, controlling or shaming their intimate partner, their girlfriend, boyfriend, if you see them like, you know, grabbing them and you're like, well, it was just a grab, it didn't leave a mark, you're witnessing coercive control, you're witnessing abusive behavior, and your silence permits it. It exacerbates isolation, which goes back to like, what do I do when somebody doesn't believe me? Because some people know when someone's not going to believe them because the message is what they're experiencing is being neglected by their surroundings. So if I'm being abused at a party and everybody's kind of laughing or dismissing or normalizing it, then I'm going to think I'm the problem. But if you're confronting the person who's shaming their partner, breaking their partner down, or if you confront them, then that creates safety for the victim, the survivor, to become a survivor instead of a victim. But that's, I don't know if I fully answered. So that's where we go with safety planning. And I think one of the other things about safety planning, because I'm not an expert in safety planning, but one of the other things about safety planning that's really important to know, there's blunt risks. Like I know Kate was talking about this before. So like strangulation's a big risk. Substance abuse is a big risk. Stalking's a big risk. But abusive behavior is intentional. It's, you know, it's built by design. So a lot of the elements of coercion and coercive control are going to go left without marks. It's going to be like very covert in its presentation. So you really do have to listen to the victim and call it out when you see it.
Can I add something about safety planning, Matt?
Yes, please.
Because I want to be very conscientious that if we were paying attention to the statistics, that means there are folks in this room who are experiencing this now. I just want to bring it back to that reality, right? That as I'm going to talk about safety planning, I want to talk to those folks, right, who are hearing this stuff and it's hitting very close to home, right? Because it's either happening to them, has happened to them, or is happening at home. And teen dating abuse is not domestic violence light. Sometimes that gets suggested, right? That because it's happening to younger folks, that for some reason it's not as dangerous or it's not as serious, right? People are getting injured, people are being killed, and it doesn't matter that it's between young folks, right? Safety planning means we come up with a plan that works for you to keep you safe, right? Because while the best plan is prevention, stopping it from happening, what if this is already happening to you? What if now, 6 months in, we already gave them our passwords, right? They already know where we live. We've already slept with them, right? What if we've already fallen in love with them? What if they're our person? What if they're the person that we feel the most safe with? Because they know us, they see us, right? Safety planning is the plan that's going to keep you safe, resisting abuse, right? resisting abuse, whatever way that looks like. And that can be one day at a time. I'm going to start detaching. I'm going to start educating myself. I'm going to start reconnecting to the people that maybe I haven't talked to in weeks. Right? I'm going to learn how to reclaim access to my phone because maybe they're all in my phone now. They're all in my inbox. They're all in my messages. Right? How am I going to start taking that back? Because you can believe that once a survivor starts taking back control, what is that abusive party going to do? They're not going to say, okay, well, I'm realizing that you're starting to put up boundaries now. They're going to say, no, you're mine now. You're my girl, you're my guy, and you're not going anywhere. Safety planning is important because every step that someone tries to take back towards healthy, that abusive party responds back with more violence. So we don't take it lightly. We take it very seriously. So if you hear about someone reporting things like stalking, reporting things like sexual violence, right, just know that it's only going to get worse, and we want to get that person to start having conversations, whether it's with their friends, and please believe them. If they're telling you, believe them. Start talking to trusted adults, right? Call our hotline, go to our website, start downloading things, download an app, right? There are apps out there for safety planning, but don't let it go. This isn't domestic violence light. It's just as dangerous.
Thank you, and here's a Patrick, I hate to go back to you with this, but how do you know if you're the problem? How do you know if you're the abuser, if you're the one who's actually being abusive in a relationship?
So abusive behavior is all about power and control, to echo that. But the underlying, usually when I give like a long presentation on it, I'll talk about like the overall behavioral pattern to identify as the controlling behaviors, right? So that's more like if somebody's an outside observer is watching a partner being really controlling to their significant other. That's how you can pick up on if they're being abusive. Internally, it comes from a sense of entitlement. So this is where it's a little tricky, because it's born out of that deep belief that they have a right to impose their will over the other person. And sometimes that clarity comes from confrontation. If somebody outside, a bystander, a classmate, a peer, intervenes and confronts that thinking, that all about you thinking. If that answers the question, Matt, I can go on. But
No, thank you for that. Mina, is it verbal abuse if they insult you until you cry? What is the difference between verbal abuse and simply being sensitive?
So yes, it is verbal abuse. If someone constantly insults you until you cry. I'm sorry, can you repeat the second half of the question?
What's the difference or line between sensitivity and verbal abuse?
Okay. So there are individuals who, let's say they're a little sensitive to whatever the situation is, right? Like someone who comes from divorced parents. They don't want to necessarily constantly be reminded of, oh, you come from divorced parents, you come from divorced parents. But if somebody takes that sentence and insults you that you are no less or you're no better than anyone because you're from divorced parents and they're insulting you, that becomes verbal abuse.
can I jump in really quick on that?
Sure.
I just wanted to back up Mina's point. Sensitivity is a strength. You know, if you're a sensitive person, that means that you're pretty in tune to other people's boundaries. Thank you, Laura. And likely very empathetic, and that's a strength. And an abusive partner is pretty in tune to taking your strengths and flipping them on you, obfuscating / gaslighting, as the kids say. Maybe the kids don't say it anymore. I say obfuscating. And so they take your strength and they turn it into a weakness, and that's on the abuser. It's not on the victim. So all of you people out there who are sensitive, keep being sensitive.
Yes.
I think it's also really important to know just a couple of things. One, first off, we left this out. Drugs and alcohol does not make somebody abusive. It takes an abusive personality and makes it worse. So if they're giving you excuses like, well, I was under the influence of something, that's just an excuse. They are maybe emotionally and verbally abusive when they're sober, but they're that much more rageful or physically assaultive when they're under the influence of something. So just be aware of that. The other thing to be aware of is, listen, if you're on the fence, and I say this often, first thing, if you're listening to the types of abuse that are out there and you're going, I think that might be me, if you're leaning into taking someone else's power, I think the most important thing you should absolutely know, because this is 100% guaranteed, any relationship you ever have in your life, if you're taking someone's power in it, if you're the bully in the relationship, if you're the abusive person, every relationship, failure. Whether you think so or not, failure. So it's not working. Because if it's not working for both parties, it's flat out not working. So it's important you know that. Also, if you're on the fence and you're like, I don't know, is it abuse? Am I even in an abusive relationship? Think of it this way. If your partner acts like your parent, you're probably being abused in your relationship. So if you're concerned that you're not back by curfew or doing something because you're going to hear it from your parent or your guardian, and that's always a fear in the back of your head, if your partner is sort of in the driver's seat of your relationship, you're probably in an abusive relationship. And that's how you discern.
Leo, I have a question for you, if you don't mind, please. It's a two-part question. The first part is, do people in the LGBTQ community experience abuse at a higher rate or the same rate as people who are not in that community? And if they experience abuse at a higher rate, why is that?
So they do experience at a higher rate, and that is because half the time when you are, and I'm just speaking for myself as a part of the community, you feel this sense of fear. You don't, if it's something like one person's out, one person's in the closet, the person's in the closet doesn't want to be outed, they use that fear against you. They don't want to, they want to come out when they want to, and the person that's the abuser will use that against them to say, hey, you're not out. If you're not out, I'm going to do this. And it's a cycle that is perpetuating. It's becoming more and more relevant as times are coming, and we just need to stop it.
Thank you. And I have this question for Kate. Kate, what advice would you give to somebody? Because earlier we were speaking about the role of the home and the household, either being a support structure or in some cases even a hindrance, an obstacle to someone getting help. What advice would you have for someone who still lives with a parent, who has abused someone in the family and still is, and the student wants to protect the family member?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes. What advice would you give to a student who is living with somebody who is abusing a family member and the student wants to protect the family member?
I think I'm actually going to field it to Officer Jill because she might work with, I know she does work with students directly and may have even heard that question before.
I have a problem with microphones. So as I was distracted by what was happening over there, so I didn't hear the full question. But what I did hear was that if a student is being abused, I believe, at home, and they want to protect the abuser, that's really normal and understandably so. You being a young person coming to school every day, you might also be embarrassed to have those conversations. But just know that, like, you can come and talk to me at any time, and it can be confidential. It doesn't have to be, something that I have to go tell somebody. If something's going on at home and you want to come and talk to me about it, and I can put you in contact with somebody who can help you. And it's not okay if somebody at home is abusing you. And I hopefully can help you with that. This isn't a great answer to the question, but really, like, the reason why I'm talking is because I want to make sure that you guys know that if something is going on at home, like, it doesn't have to stay at home. You don't have to call 911 to get a police officer to come respond to your house. Like, if you're not comfortable doing that, and if you're comfortable with me being in the school, your officer here, like, please come talk to me because I have those connections with the police department. Again, it doesn't have to stay at home. You can come and talk to me about it, and I'll set you up with those resources.
Let me just supplement. There are mandatory reporters so that if you speak with the school authority and you reflect that there's some abuse going on at home, they have to report it. If you speak to a physician, he has to report it. So it can't be just unreported. Once you make that statement, somebody can assist you and take care of it. I did want to just pursue a thought. When you grow up in an abusive background, I've rarely met a young man who seen abuse where a dad might have been abusive to the mom. He did not want to protect his mother but felt maybe he couldn't do it. Or a young girl seeing her mom being abused by her dad, didn't know that or knew that she never wanted that to reoccur when she got older. But what happens is, as you get older, unless you understand how to break a pattern, it's going to reoccur because that's your knee-jerk or understandable reaction to the same set of facts. So I'm asking you to think about that. When you see it, you have to really reflect upon how you want to be so that you don't repeat the same kinds of things that you saw when you were growing up that you knew at that point in time were not how you wanted it to be.
Thank you.
Can I also add something?
Yes.
That's okay. I want to talk to the first question that was asked about whether this happens to LGBTQ plus folk, and also reiterate that it does happen to them, but at the same time, this also applies to sexual violence as well. And again, it overlaps. So in a lot of cases, they go through these things a lot more, and it tends to be because of intersectionality. And it's like, you take the person, for example, like even me as a person of the community, I am Black. I'm a Hispanic person, I am a part of the community, and then you add all those things together and you can be a target from different perpetrators and people because you have all these different things about you. And this happens a lot more often to our Black transgender folk in our community, and I just felt like it was important to highlight that and talk about that because, again, it happens so much more often to them because of who they are, because of what people see they are, and they don't see them as people, they just see them as something to take control over, to enforce their power over. And I just felt very compelled to, again, speak about that because, again, it happens to them so much more often out in the community in general, in our, in our country. It happens to them so often. And again, for many different reasons, but it just felt important to highlight that. So.
I appreciate that. I actually asked Mr. Seymour if I could address that question because although I am not a member of the LGBTQ plus community, I have done some work in this area, and I think from what I understand, and I'm certainly no expert, but sometimes members of the LGBTQ plus community are subjected either more often or fail to get help is because many times they are living in silence. They are not out necessarily to their friends. Their relationships are not public. They may not be out to their families, to their teachers. And if they are, they may not be accepted by their families and by their friends. And therefore, if you don't accept me for who I am, how dare I come to you and tell you that in my relationship I am being abused, only to fear that you will turn and say to me, well, it's your own fault because you chose that life, and this is what's going to happen to you in that life. So I think lots of times the LGBTQ plus community is living in a very small, quiet, silent, closeted sometimes circle, and therefore they don't have this big network of people that people in the straight, cis, hetero community have. And I think that it allows these behaviors to maybe perpetrate in a way that they wouldn't in a straight relationship. That's just
Well
my
said.
understanding.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, very well said.
Thank you. And this question is for the sheriff. Sheriff, should someone forgive their abuser and give them a second chance?
I'm of the belief you can forgive any and everyone, but I'm also on the belief that that forgiveness doesn't allow for it to happen again. You know what you're faced with hand for its face value. If you know there's a situation where that person's going to repeat their actions towards you, that's easily identifiable at the onset. So you can forgive, but you can't forget. If I may go a little further, Matt. In my occupation, I oversee the courts in the jail. Ms. Gumpers, the judge, we have our interrelationship in some form or fashion because of that. But, and this might be a poor term, but I'm going to go with it anyway. There is the finished product when you talk about the courts and the jail. The finished product is that you acknowledge and come forth and address the issue, put it out there. The finished product, in terms of the correctional side, I've spoken to many folks who've expressed themselves on their domestic violence and why they are in our facilities. And 9 times out of 10, it's because they controlled the victim. The victim didn't know when to come forth and speak. Waited too late. Waited too late is not a good thing for the obvious reason. So to come out and talk about if you're involved in any type of domestic violence, how about we address it beforehand before you get to that unnecessary finished product? Nobody wants to be a victim. And when you have statistics that show that the victim allowed it to go too long and that person took advantage of it, we have something to work on. We have something to build on. So the key is, yes, bring it out. Don't allow yourself to continue to be a victim, and don't allow your silence to result in someone being a victim. We all help each out, and it's intertwined, or collectively together we help each other out. So.
Thank you, Sheriff. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up, but I'm going to go to Bergen County ADV with the same question.
Sure. Thank you, Matt. I just want to jump off what the sheriff said. You know, that question is something that we get so often at ADV from teens, from young adults, folks who've been married for 20 years. How do I know somebody's changing? Right? And our position as don't believe what they tell you, believe what you see them do. And as painful as that may feel, right, to be told that the person who you've loved and who you knew while they were still good to you, while they were your person, that they may never go back to being that person, because the person that you now see in front of you is who they really are, based off of what they're doing. Because this was just an appetizer to hopefully what will be more learning and more engagement on this topic, I'll just say this: focus on you and your healing. Focus on you and what makes you feel good about yourself, what makes you feel safe again. What do you need to feel free again, right? Let that person do the work that they need to do to stop being abusive, because you can't change them. You can't change them. And believe not what they say, believe what they do.
And if I could just add to that question, Matt. Someone who's a victim has already had so much of their voice silenced, so much of their autonomy restricted, and their rights restricted. If they want to forgive somebody, we should respect that. And if they don't want to forgive somebody, we should respect that. It's our obligation as community members, to quote the good mayor in his proclamation, it takes a coordinated community effort. And it's on us, everybody up on this panel, everybody out in the audience and watching from home, to make sure that we create safety for victims if they choose to forgive or not, and to hold offenders accountable so that they don't continue to assault. And never, never should we put that on the victim.
Thank you. I'd like to thank our panel. I'd also like to congratulate Assistant Prosecutor Jessica Gombers on a great career in law enforcement, who's retiring, well-deserved. Congratulations, Jessica. And thank you. We're going to miss you. And Jessica, any closing final words, Jessica?
No, thank you.
Got it. And we'd like to thank all of you, most importantly, for being a great audience, all of our community members, the Girl Scouts for the great posters in the room, and most importantly, if anyone here needs help, don't be afraid to ask. And a few of us will hang around, so if anybody wants to talk to us when we're done, feel free, please, we're here. Thank you and have a great day.